So welcome back to All This Math. This is Professor Parker, and let's see what this looks like. So right now we're about to simplify or multiply these two binomials. And this is a binomial because it has two terms in it, and this is a binomial because it has two terms in it. Now the thing that looks a little different about these is that they have this letter here, I. This is not a variable. It represents an imaginary number, which represents the square root of -1, which is an imaginary number. You know, it's all he's all right, but he's not real, right? It's not a real number. Like 4 is a real number, -10 is a real number, 4 is a real number, 3 is a real number, but I represents something that's not real. But it's something we still got to deal with. So it's like the square root of -1. That's not really it's not a real thing, but it's something that you will encounter. So we use the letter I to represent it because it's the first letter of the word imaginary. At least I think that's why I is used, the first letter of the word imaginary, right? So, but it's still two binomials, so we can still use the FOIL method, or if you're not a fan of the FOIL method, just the distributed property where you just say multiply 4 by everything in this binomial, and then multiply -10i by everything in this binomial, which ends up being the FOIL method anyway. But some teachers don't like the FOIL method, so in case your teacher didn't teach you the FOIL method, that's cool too. You can still simplify this. But I'm about to use the FOIL method because I rock with the FOIL method. So let's say, all right, FOIL stands for first, outer, inner, last. First meaning the first terms inside each set of parentheses. So this is the first term here, this is the first term here. So you do 4 times 4. All right, so 4 times 4, you know your multiplication facts, so you know that's 16. So, all right, we 1/4 or 25% of the way done, right? In terms of our multiplication, that is. Now the outers, the O stands for outers, the O in aluminum foil, right? The outer terms are this 4 and this 3i. Now when I say outer, I don't mean like outside the parentheses. I don't mean that. I mean, if you look at like this problem, right? Look at the board, right? Or look at your screen. What are the outermost terms out of these 4 terms? The outermost terms in terms of position-wise would be the 4 and the 3i. So that's what the O in FOIL stands for, the outermost terms. So that tells you to multiply those two terms next. So 4 times 3i is 12i. So that's going to be plus 12i. And then the I in FOIL stands for the innermost terms. So the innermost terms are -10i and 4. So now we got -40i. All right, now down to the L. The L stands for last, the last terms. Just like we started out with the first terms in the parentheses. Now we go into the last terms in the parentheses. So the last terms are -10i and +3i. Multiply them together. Now you got -30i. So that's -30i. Now, I just made a mistake. I hope somebody caught it. -10 times 3 is -30, but I times I ain't I. I times I is I to the second power. I times I is I to the second power. See how it happened just that quick. Careless mistakes. Careless mistakes. All right? Because we're not adding. We're not combining like terms. If we were combining like terms, then it would just be I. If we was doing -10i plus 3i, then it would be -7i. Right? But because we're multiplying, we do the coefficients first. -10 times 3, you get -30. Then I times I, that's I to the second power, because the multiplication rule for exponents states that you write the base one time and you add their exponents. So this has an invisible exponent 1. This has an invisible exponent 1. Add them together. 1 plus 1 is 2. That's how we get I squared. Now we're going to simplify this. We're going to simplify it now, right? So we look for like terms. I see 2 of them off the rip. 12i, -40i, right? They both got i's in them. So we do this. We say 16 minus, because 12 take away 40. You got to know how to do your arithmetic with negative numbers. So 12 take away 40 is -28. So that's -28i. And then we got -30i squared. Now, this is something you got to know. I squared is special because I squared, and you should put this in your notes, I squared is equal to -1. I squared equals -1, and you should memorize that. I squared equals negative 1. Let me show you something. Matter of fact, I is equal to the square root of negative 1, and I squared is equal to negative 1. Now, why does that make sense? Because if I square this and I square this, if you square a square root, the exponent 2 and the radical sign cancel each other out, leaving you with what was underneath of the radical sign, which is negative 1. So that's why I squared is equal to negative 1. But you might as well just memorize these two. I is equal to the square root of negative 1, and I squared is equal to negative 1. So that means this I squared, we can replace that with a negative 1. So now we got 16 minus 28I plus 30. Now, why is it plus 30? Because I told you, I squared turns into a negative 1, because I squared is negative 1. They the same thing. And in terms of simplifying, we want to get rid of the i's as much as possible. So I turn I squared into negative 1, and then I do negative 30 times negative 1. That's going to give me positive 30. So now I can combine these two, the 16 and the 30. Now, in case you're wondering, well, how should you write it? Should you write the I term first, or should you write the real number term first? So we follow this format, which is A plus BI, which means the I term always goes second. The I term always goes second. So we're going to do 16 and 30. That's going to be 46. And then minus 28I. And then that is our final answer. Because you cannot combine these two, because this is real and this is not. Just like a real person and a fake person can't really, they might be in the same space, but they can't really roll together like that. So you can't combine these two, right? Because that's imaginary. That's negative 28I. That's 46. 46 is real. Negative 28I is not real. It's imaginary. So this is the final answer. So all we did was we did a little FOIL method, but it was, complicated a little bit with the fact that we were dealing with imaginary numbers within our expressions, but we still essentially did the same thing. Make sure, like I said, make sure you have these in your notes, these pieces of information. I equals the square root of negative 1. I squared equals negative 1. And for our final answer, we write it in this format. When we're dealing with complex numbers, they call it, or imaginary numbers, A plus BI. All right? Now, I showed you how to do these. Now my recommendation is to go find some examples. Find some examples of problems like this. We're using the FOIL method with imaginary numbers. Go get some practice. Ask your teacher, your professor, or do some research online to find some example problems similar to this and get some practice. Do yourself a favor. Get some practice. I'm always preaching that. You know that if you watch this channel, you watch these videos. Get some practice. All right? I'll see you in the next video. Peace.